I decided to go ahead and do part 5 of the What the Hell is Flicker Street and get it out of the way, though I probably won't post it for a day or two. This is only like a day and a half after I did the other one, the last one. So anyway, what were we discussing? Where was I in 2017 with all of this? Well, I had finished the story arc for Austerity, um, which I'm thinking about putting as the graphic in the thumbnail of this picture of her that I did when it was a webcomic idea. She didn't really change that much, just the story around her. Last video, I put a picture of Ellinger, which is the name of my current story and its pivotal character. And I also promised you I'd show you some of the ones I did in 2017, some of the art. So let me see, wade through the madness here. So this is Ellinger, and this is my original black and white pencil sketch. I just used regular pencils and an eraser, regular eraser, and that was it. So I drew that I started the page, the Flicker Street, Henry Covert's Flicker Street page around maybe August, maybe a little before that, maybe June or July of 2017. So that summer, I went out of town to the Necronomicon in Providence, Rhode Island, and was able to see some of my few rather very accomplished friends. I don't have many friends in that league. I can't say they're my close friends, but from our interactions over the several years, I could call them friends. One was Richard Stanley, the director of Dust Devil and The Color Out of Space, and had drinks with him. My friend Scott was up there, and I did look. Sorry, a notification distracted me there. We hung out together. We watched a band, and we walked around Providence late at night, all up and down, and he showed us various landmarks of places that Lovecraft had been inspired by for stories, and it was really an amazing evening. A couple of nights later, Scott went home early to see the eclipse from a better vantage point, and I, on H.P. Lovecraft's birthday, August 20th, I believe, yeah, I saw Coven live for the first, and only time so far. It was one of their very first shows in America in about 35 years, maybe, or more. Jinx Dawson is the aforementioned friend of mine, and I had done a video of one of her songs when she was kind of in the process of becoming a presence on social media and reinvigorating the Coven concept, which she put out a lot of unreleased material called Metal Goth Queen, and then she put out I guess around 20, I don't know, I want to say 2013, 2014, she put out the album just called Jinx, which, of course was her name, but also a double meaning. And she had a pretty much brand new band on there, though I believe Rick Durrett, the keyboardist and pianist from Coven, is playing on there, and possibly also the other two. Steve Ross and Oz Osborne, I think, appear briefly on the album too. The core of her current band, of that band on that album, and Rick Durrett planned on touring. It got put off quite a few times, and Rick ended up not touring as part of the new Coven, though they're called Coven, not the new Coven. And anyway, they played this theater in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was just amazing. But I should go into that on another video. But it was an influence on me. It inspired me a lot. And at the time, I was a little infatuated with a friend of mine who lived in Charlotte here, but I had not met in person. I'd met on Facebook. And when I got back from out of town, she texted me, and we began talking regularly. And She is an incredible artist. Her name's Delphine Levesque Demers, and she has a couple of YouTube channels under her name. And she is an amazing artist. She's very much more accomplished than I've ever been in that field of visual art. She's, had little stickers she's made and designed in bubblegum machines around the country, and she's had her characters shown in Hot Topic stores, and she's done these major um, shows and gallery showings, and she has a thing called Tarot 78 where she brings out these artists to interpret the tarot in their own styles, and she does that every year. I'm not sure. I don't think she did it this year, but this year throw everyone off whack. Um, I haven't talked to her in a few months, but I still consider her a good friend, and hopefully one day I'll meet her in person. I don't think she lives terribly far from me, maybe across town, but not all the way across town. My point is that she inspired me. Her presence in my life inspired me to start doing visual art again and take it more seriously. But I wanted to go back to my styles that I had employed when I was younger, which were kind of photographic reference materials. So I rendered things real. I was using that. So I was rendering things realistically at their core, but the kind of flourishes around them are kind of streaky lines and impressionism and expressionism. Obviously very influenced by Bill Sienkiewicz, was a key artist in my life when he kind of hit when I was in junior high school. And he I've met him a few times. He's a great guy, and almost worked with him once, kind of tangentially, when I did that Marvel pitch back in 2006. Um, but Bill really changed the way I drew and the way I kind of took from a realistic repertoire, but very expressionistic lines. Other influences on me at that time were like Steve Bissette and John Toddleben on Swamp Thing, and Walt Simonson on Thor. Simonson's influence on me has really kind of dimmed over the years. He's kind of my least favorite of those artists. I think his best material was even earlier than Thor, really, such as the Alien movie adaptation, which I'm selling right now on eBay, and Manhunter for DC, and various sundry other things. But he's a great artist. He's just more of a cartoonist, and I think he became overly stylized as he got older, as a lot of people did. And see, I saw that happening to myself. Which is one reason I stopped drawing full time in the 1990s, because I was getting frustrated that the repertoire of images in my head that I drew from to uh, cartoon these characters that I imagined in my mind, I mean, Flicker Street characters mainly, was getting very rote and cliched and limited, repetitious. It was getting harder and harder for me to draw anything that looked different out of my head, that I just didn't have it. My father had that imagination and could do that, and then shade them very realistically with the darks and lights, and give them weight and volume and three dimensions, appearance of three dimensions. Um, but I didn't have that ability anymore, and I don't know what had caused it. Maybe my part of my brain that was concentrating on music and writing and journalism kind of went away, took away from the art uh, aspect of it. But anyway, Ellinger was my first drawing, and I drew that shortly after I became. I got to know Delphine a lot more, and of course, I made a character based on her. We'll get into that later, um, as I do with a lot of people I know. Ellinger is based on a character. He's kind of loosely based, but he's inspired by a character in a film from the 1970s. I'm not going to say it, not because I think I'm ripping it off or getting in trouble or anything, but just because I want Ellinger to speak for himself and the story to speak for itself when it is finally around. By the time it takes to finally get published, I'm sure I'll have already talked about his source material and influences, and maybe when it comes out, people will be interested enough to ask me, but I don't count on that ever happening. So I'm kind of answering those questions now, uh, just in case, in case I do get, break with this, or in case I never do. I just want to put this stuff down for the record, for myself, for my friends, and for whoever counts themselves as fans of my artwork and my writing. Um, so anyway, um, I started doing a series of portraits. The next one I did was of a very long time character of mine called Convy Such. And here's the one I did. Now, of course, it was kind of in my. I did base it on a few photographs I composited together. He's got a crooked face. That's deliberate, though. He's been beat up a lot over the years. He's obviously a rock star, kind of has a look somewhere in between Simon Gallup of The Cure and Glenn Hughes of Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. And he is a bass player like both of them. But the big hair always just has that. I envy him as mine continues to recede. His just seems to keep getting bigger. He doesn't have a mullet anymore, though, like he did in the 80s. But he does have kind of a long, fringy mane there. And yeah, he's a very 80s kind of character in that sense. I mean, he's a more aggressive musician than a lot of the metal musicians I initially patterned him after. Like I said, Simon Gallup. That came later as an influence when I got into The Cure. Um, but Glenn Hughes is a big influence. I kind of tend to hear his singing voice when I'm imagining Convy Lee singing. Um, in any case, I didn't really like the way that one turned out as much because it had basic line work and it had some cliched lines that I've used to fill in things from the photo, some stylization that's pretty common. Um, but there it is, and I was able to make up for it later by doing a different portrait with him in it, not alone though. But right after I did this, I did one of this character, and this is the first look. And this was a little closer to what I did with Ellinger from a photographic reference. I composited a few. It's not perfect. Her eyes are not aligned very well, but this is Anouk Lavage, and she is in the story. She's about a quarter Native American, and the rest French, Caucasian French, and I based her on Delphin, and this is based on pictures of Delphin when she was rather young and looked a bit different than now. She has kind of a more glamorous, persona now. But I'll get back into that. I'll go ahead and jump ahead just so I can kind of tie this together, and hopefully I'll be able to find what I'm looking for before too long. If not, I may give up this pursuit altogether. Let's see. I had this open to the early stuff, but not so much to this one that I'm thinking of here. It might be, let's see. Oh, here it is. So this is something I did many months later. I guess I finished this piece in mid 2019. I started drawing it in late 2018. So this is after the process of my style evolving. This is Convy Such and Anouk Lavage. And this is closer to how I imagine them and want them to look. I'm very happy with how the way this turned out. Anouk has very 80s kind of jewelry and outfit, which is very much like what Delphin sports in real life. And of course, Convy has his, jewelry, his big hair, and the 80s with the big lapels and the jacket with the sleeves rolled up. So anyway, that's something I was happy with that came later. I was able to, those characters gradually became a couple. That was kind of an organic thing, and I didn't necessarily expect that or try to make it happen. But like I was talking about last time, a lot of this stuff kind of writes itself, and these characters reveal themselves and their motives, their likes, dislikes, and loves and hates to me uh, on their own, and I'm just recording it. And names come to me and ideas. The whole process to me is like it is kind of mystical, and I always kind of wondered about that, but I thought that was a little ponderous and maybe pretentious to say that kind of thing. But after I met my ex fiance Kelly, who was into alchemy and tarot and magic, and also a great artist and writer, but she pretty much convinced me that really this whole process was kind of a magical working. I had thought of that about some other artists. Like I kept thinking that Twin Peaks was David Lynch's alchemical working, his great work, his magnum opus. And I still kind of think that because there's so much of that embedded into Twin Peaks, both the plot and the DNA of its style, its vibe. Um, but I didn't really think of it in relation to myself. Of course, I don't believe I'm near on the level of David Lynch as a creator or a craftsman. But I will say that Kelly helped me realize that I am channeling much the same as Lynch does. He talks about this a lot, his creative process, and I'm very inspired. There's a documentary on the Twin Peaks: The Return Blu-ray set. It's a 5-hour documentary with all, every aspect of the making of the 18-hour. Well, it's kind of like an 18-hour one-piece film, but they chopped it up into series episodes. Um, and there's a bit on that Blu-ray documentary about his process and the way he taps into his subconscious and the way ideas come to him and the spontaneity of it. And it is kind of mystical. It's kind of wild. And but anyway, I'm happy to be back in tune with that process. I think when I did the backstory treatments, 17 that I told you about, which again I haven't posted number 17 yet. They were more deliberate, more contrived. And I think even though the plot, overarching plots, I definitely like, I think I did a pretty good job with that, expressing what I'd wanted to express all those years, getting it down on paper and then on the computer and now onto my Facebook pages. But the actual writing, the nuts and bolts of it was not very good in a lot of cases, especially as I got sicker and I was still trying to do this project, and it just finally became impossible to finish it. Because originally I was gonna, like I said, I was gonna do 20 installments, and ended up settling for doing 17. And then I went back and re-edited them. That was another thing. When I launched the Henry Covert's Flickr Street page, I decided I was going to re-edit all 17 chapters and post them, and people could read them or not read them. And I touched on a bit of this last time. But anyway, that was an ongoing project. I didn't think it would take 3 years to post all these installments. I'm a little embarrassed about that. Number 16, I guess, went up, I don't know, a couple months ago, 3, 4 months ago, maybe even. And then there's still no 17 because I've been finishing it and reworking it, and I'm almost done. But then I have to do a final edit, and then I have to obviously post it. And like I said, I'm going to then take all 17 parts, the whole the whole piece, and put it on my official website, the Flickr Street website. Um, so my art was kind of a journey through this, and all through the story of Ellinger as well, because now I was finally able, I'd killed off a lot of characters, and I was kind of a bit more grounded again. I kind of could exhale from all the action and kind of look and see this frontier that things were headed towards. And somehow this Ellinger character, uh, he is like my guide through this, and he is one of my favorite creations that I've ever created. And I will say I wanted to call him something like Rich Buckler's character from Deathlock called Hellinger. So I had a name like that in mind. I didn't want to call him Dillinger. That seemed too common because of the gangster and everything. But I did happen to meet a film critic named Kat Ellinger, and like the minute I encountered her online, I was like, "That's the name." The funny thing is, her husband, uh, he got a bit surly with me online and on the Facebook page, and threatened to either. He strongly implied he was either going to beat me up. I'm not sure how he could do that from the United Kingdom, but or definitely sue me for stealing his name. So, in between laughing at this, I just got annoyed and blocked him, and I disengaged from Kat. And, I'm sad about that because she's an up and coming critic and a great writer. And I don't know the status of her personal life or any of that. It's absolutely none of my business. But I thought Mr. Ellinger was kind of an asshole, and he was being ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't tell if he was serious or not because he kept shifting. But in any case, if someone's going to threaten your livelihood, which is not my livelihood yet, but hopefully it will be one day. You're going to defend it, and I said you're never going to be able to sue me. This is absurd. And so yeah, and Ellinger is a one name character. I mean, I'm not saying he's like Madonna or Prince, but he is Ellinger. He does have a birth natal name and a first name, middle name, last name, and he's had several aliases. But Ellinger is kind of what he's worked his way into as this kind of unseen force that is kind of gathering followers and recruits for kind of a revolution. And a lot of it's based seemingly at first on this Black Power idea and, blacks in America rising up and claiming what's theirs, which goes back, the roots of that go back to the film I was influenced by. That I kind of got the idea for this kind of character. But there's a lot more to it than that. That element is in there. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. My stories, as far as that, as articulated through my characters, I'm not going to lecture or pontificate in any kind of exposition or narration. But I do think if you hear my characters long enough, you'll realize, this stuff, it's just as passionate about politically and philosophically as I am in reality and somewhat online. Um, so I decided really this year, I made a more conscious decision that I was going to withdraw from expressing this stuff overtly on social media and just express it through my story. And that was a catalyst for tying a lot of things together and taking the Ellinger arc to its 2/3 of the way through its life. It spans 5 years total, and I got it through, the first three. And there's, a climactic event that happens in 2012 because my story is a few years behind me because of the chronology I've followed. So even though the world of Flickr Street, the technology is a bit more publicly evolved or advanced than it is even now in our reality. I say publicly as in people really knowing about it, using it, though it's mainly in the hands of the rich. Um, that they arrived at that several years before we did. So who knows what they're going to look like in 2020? But once I finish Ellinger, I'm going to go into the next arc called the Neologs, and that's going to span, begin the year 2015 and probably span through to the end of either end of 2019, and 2020 will launch a new story because, by that time this year will be enshrined in the Hall of Fame of Madness, or 2020 will be its climactic year, and we'll go forward, and maybe it'll be post-apocalyptic, and possibly by then in reality we'll be in a post-apocalyptic scenario. Who can say? It depends on how quickly I write this thing and how things shake out over the next several months here for planet Earth and the United States. But anyway, that's kind of what material I've been putting on the Flickr Street pages on Facebook. Is these character portraits, characters that are in the Ellinger arc, and also my backstory treatments in their edited and revised form. I'm sorry I'm looking away from you for so long. I'm trying to divide my attention and find some pieces that I can display to you. So I won't do them all this time, but I'll do a handful more. So this is Blake Hawkmore, and he's a character I made up in the 1980s, and again in that magical year 1987. And I killed him off that year too. Though in the story it was the year I'd gotten through to 1988, which is where the 1987. It's a 3-year arc, it's 86, 87, 88, but it's called 1987. So he dies, but I accidentally found loopholes and clauses in my own death rules for my story. That involved kind of dark magic and alchemy and various arcane things and alien things, and that makes sense within the story once you know what's happening. It's not so far fetched. It's definitely not as far fetched as a lot of the resurrections that have taken place on soap operas, much less in Marvel Comics or even DC. But Marvel's become the champion of how to, kill a character for a quick buck and resurrect them in the most outlandish way possible from final death. And so death has lost its meaning. There's no death, there's no meaning for it in either of those long form venues anymore. But it does have meaning in mine. Very few characters are coming back from the dead, but in the Elder story, and especially in the next arc, we'll get into exactly how and why they're resurrected and why most people are not resurrected, why it's just impossible. But what the alien technology and magic and alchemy have done to advance the human race medically, uh, subtly over time, behind the scenes, and then finally a bit more overtly as we get into the 2012 to the second term of the president that's reelected in 2012 and on the Flicker Street reality. So anyway, Blake he just has mysteriously come back, and he's running a corporation that is owned by Clive Dharma, who's one of my very major characters and one of my oldest and most beloved. He's probably my most beloved character. Another character who returns from the dead in this storyline is Reverend Vidal Winan, and I loosely based him on my friend Vincent, who I did some comic books with in high school and then college. Um, this character I killed off in the story year 1995. I don't remember when I wrote it. It was in the 90s, but I'm just not sure. But essentially, uh, he also has mysteriously come back, and Blake is kind of keeping him hidden away. And he's eventually going to try to get out of this skyscraper. The place that Blake works and runs for Clive is called the Zed Foundation, and um, it has various different functions, which I'll get into another time. Um, but anyway, the overseeing like CEO executive is Marguerite, and she's the ex-wife of Clive. And I've used her intermittently over the years as kind of a supporting character for Clive, and also for another character, Damon, who married her and then divorced her. But her and Clive have a lifelong on and off connection. So he finally gives her this job and says, you take care of the skyscraper, whatever they call the building. I haven't decided exactly yet, but we'll just call it the Zed building, and or the Zed Foundation building. I don't know. So, and she appoints Blake Hawthorne. We're wondering if you're reading it and say you've already encountered the 1987 arc, which who knows what order these are going to come out in at this point. You're going to wonder how he's back and why now he's cut his hair and he's wearing a suit when before he had long hair and wore black band t-shirts and beat up blue jeans. So he's changed, he's matured, he's grown up. He is also a riff on a person I know personally, who was once a very good friend of mine. Still, I consider a friend, but our lives have diverged. But again, through the magic of Facebook, I'm talking to him and Vincent again on occasion, not really regularly, but on occasion, keeping up as best as we can with each other, just the basics of our lives, but not really on an intimate level like we did in the 1980s. So if you think I have a lot of affection for the 1980s, it's both true and false. Delphin is really obsessed with it, and another uh, man I know who I used to be pretty close friends with, named Mark, they have kind of this obsession with it on an artistic level, the art, music, and films and things, designs and culture that came out in the 1980s. But they're a bit younger than me, and so they have kind of a romanticized backward view, which is probably how I look at the 1970s and possibly at one time did the 1960s when I was a small child. Um, because you're too young to experience it yourself, but there's these echoes, and then when you get older, you start to uh, feel those echoes kind of, you know, they kind of come into you and make you like curious, like if only I could like mentally time trip back to this era. And I do that through the art of that era. To me, that's like time traveling. I mean, especially love movies of the 1970s, and the friends I mentioned love the stuff of the 1980s. Um, but I pretty much grew up in the 1980s. I don't have the obsession that they do. Like I said, I'm a little more obsessed with the 70s. Nor do I have really fond memories of the first half of the 80s. It was a very difficult time growing up. It was hell. So these things either forge you or break you. And I think I've been broken a few times, but reforged, and I'm still kind of, I'm still standing, so to speak. So um, in the latter half of the 80s, though, there were some happy events in my life and a lot of creative time. That's when I really decided I wanted to be a writer, not just an artist. Um, and, started heading slowly into the direction of doing music, but that didn't come to full fruition until 1990 or so. So in any case, I like the 80s, and I'm nostalgic for the latter half of the 80s that I experienced. Even though there was a bit of pain during that period, no doubt, there was also quite a bit of growing up and pleasure, and especially with uh, with the art that I experienced and was getting into and expanding myself by experiencing, but also the art I was creating, which was becoming more expansive. And, I was getting past especially in college, after high school and on into college, the few years on and off I went to college, I finally dropped out altogether, I believe, 1990. Um, but and I was nowhere near finished my program. And it was only a 2 year program, but I'd stretched it over like 3 or 4 years, something like that. But um, so that's kind of by the time I got to that, it was a different period, but I was still writing that whole time. As a matter of fact, some of the major stuff that has become Flickr Street was written in these now battered old notebooks um, after class or in between classes at this place called the Van Every Building at Central Piedmont Community College, where I went to college, and it was a fun time, and I had a lot of friends then, which I had not had prior to high school or even in high school. Um, by this time, like toward the late part of this time, it's when I lost touch with Thomas Shackelford Davis. And, I regret not being able to reconnect with him before he kind of prematurely passed away in 2004. And that's kind of a regret I have because he did send me a letter, I believe in 2002, asking was I still living there. And coincidentally, I had moved back in with my father for a time because he and my mom needed caregiving. Um, so I could have answered, but I didn't know he had cancer then, if he knew even. But I kind of suspect he did, and maybe he was trying to get his karma right, tie up loose ends. And I was a big one from his youth, and I'm a little ashamed that I didn't contact him, but I was having an enormous amount of difficulty in life, and so were my parents, and my job was I loved my job, but it was stressing me out too. So, I just kind of felt like I've got to focus my energies on here and now and me and not the past. And I've kind of come to peace with the past, capital T, capital P, the past, um, in recent years. Even more so since I've been on Facebook and re encountered some people from my youth, and also since I've been divorced and been kind of, just kind of alone in the world. And so I'm not desperately seeking the past, but when I re encounter it, I try to, take it in a certain context. And if it can be recontextualized for now, uh, and still respect to what happened in the past or what it's been, then that's cool. But if people have grown too far distant, it's it's not worth maintaining. It's not worth putting your energy into, and especially if it's with people, like JJ and like my ex best friend, who I think are takers of energy rather than givers of energy. Uh, Both have had their creative peak, and I think are stagnant now. Maybe not so much the latter person, I don't know what he's up to. I have no idea. But my thing is that once I came to that conclusion that there was a stagnation or a septic tendency in the way that I was transacting with them or them with me, and they became dissatisfied with me. They did not. Neither of them liked the fact that I was expanding my tastes in music, art, and comics and movies. The latter personage, he did at first. He helped encourage me, but after time, I was still trying to discover things, and he was still running over the same things we'd been running over for all our lives. And the other gentleman, he just went full tilt conservative, tie and suit, and you know, who cares about that stuff? But of course, what little vague echoes I've heard of him, he's had I think he enjoys the Marvel movies because that's something we all shared as a kid, and none of us thought that these movies would happen, or much less that they would be good, much less that they would make this much fucking money and cultural impact. So that's a resonant thing. And there's some people I can share that with from my past, like Vincent, who really get it, who get that feeling. And then there are people like some of the other people I mentioned who I don't know, you know, I don't care. So I'm going to wrap up now as I'm getting too maudlin here. Um, but this is kind of an overview of where I'm going, what's been happening. The next chapter, I'm basically just going to talk about the story I'm writing now and plans for the future, and show you some more art, talk about some more characters. I'm not sure how many of these I'll do. Probably not that many. So you probably only have to bear with me, a couple more hours total, maybe 3 or 4. I'm sorry. Okay, so anyway, take care, and I will talk to you soon.